not how most modern scientists regard the universe. The rationalism introduced by Descartes was brought to its epitome by Spinoza. Yet within a dozen years of Spinoza's death, rationalism was superseded by empiricism, as put forward by the British philosopher John Locke. The belief that ultimately the truth can be discovered by reason gave way to the belief that the only way we can know the truth is by experience. The counterwave of German metaphysics in the 19th century saw a revival of Spinoza's stock on the philosophical exchange. This was largely unfortunate. The clear rationalism of Spinoza's system was to inspire Hegel to an even more vast system, where steepled clarity was replaced with gargoyled German metaphysics. Spinoza equally inspired the Marxism that grew out of Hegelianism as an inversion of it, yet dialectical materialism remains but a lumpen shadow of Spinoza's geometric pantheism. Spinoza's influence continues. Some modern mathematicians who otherwise view philosophy with contempt retain a soft spot for him. Alas, his belief in a certain rational universe contains built-in self-contradictions similar to their own belief in a certain mathematical universe. The systematic explanation of the world has crumbled into a rubble of relativisms. We live in the post-war era of Humpty Dumpty, where Spinoza's philosophy is but a poetic dream. Yet it remains one of the finest ever produced. From Spinoza's writings. The first 8 definitions upon which Spinoza based the geometric proof of his system. 1. By cause of itself, causa sui, I understand that whose essence involves existence, or that whose nature cannot be conceived except as existing. 2. A thing is said to be finite in its kind, in suo genere finita, when it can be limited by another thing of the same nature. For example, a body is said to be finite because we can always conceive of another body larger than it. Similarly, thought is limited by another thought. But body cannot be limited by thought, nor thought by body. 3. By substance, substantia, I understand that which is in itself and is conceived through itself, that is, that the conception of which does not depend upon the conception of another thing from which it has to be formed. 4. By attribute, attributum, I understand that which the intellect perceives of substance as constituting its essence. 5. By mode, modus, I understand the modification of substance, that which is in something else, through which it is also conceived. 6. By God, Deus, I understand an absolutely infinite being, that is, substance consisting of infinite attributes, each of which expresses eternal and infinite essence. 7. A thing is said to be free, libera, which exists solely through the necessity of its own nature, and is determined into action by itself alone. That thing is said to be necessary, necessaria, or rather compelled, coacta, which is determined by something else to exist and act in a certain definite and determinate way. 8. I understand eternity, eternitatis, in so far as it is conceived as following necessarily from the definition of an eternal thing. Ethics, Part 1, Opening Definitions. An example of Spinoza's thoroughgoing pantheism. Apart from God, no substance can exist or be conceived. Ethics, Part 1, Proposition 14. Another proof of God's existence. Because the ability to exist is a power, it follows that the more reality belongs to the nature of a thing, the more power it has of itself to exist. Therefore an absolutely infinite being, or God, has of himself an absolutely infinite power of existing. Thus he exists absolutely. Ethics, Part 1. Examples of Spinoza's all-embracing determinism. God is the cause of all things which are in him. Ethics, Part 1. There is nothing contingent in nature, but all things are from the necessity of the divine nature determined to exist and to act in a definite way. Ethics, Part 1. When people think they are free, they are deceived. They hold to this opinion only because they are conscious of their actions, but remain ignorant of what actually causes these actions. Ethics, Part 2. The two attributes. Mind and body are one and the same individual, which is conceived now under the attribute of thought and now under the attribute of extension. Ethics, Part 2. Spinoza's idea of government, far in advance of its time if a trifle utopian. The ultimate aim of government is not to rule or restrain by fear, not to exact obedience, but on the contrary, to free every man from fear so that he is able to live in the greatest possible security. In other words, to strengthen his natural right to exist and go about his business without injury to himself or to others. The object of government is not to change men from rational beings into beasts or puppets, but to enable them to develop their minds and bodies in security, and to use their reason without restraint, without showing hatred, anger, or deceit, nor watched with the eyes of jealousy and injustice. In effect, the true aim of government is liberty. Tractatus Theologico-Politicus, Chapter 20. Chronology of significant philosophical dates. 6th century BC, the beginning of Western philosophy with Thales of Miletus. End of 6th century BC, death of Pythagoras. 399 BC, Socrates sentenced to death in Athens. Circa 387 BC, Plato founds the Academy in Athens, the first university. 335 BC, Aristotle founds the Lyceum in Athens, a rival school to the Academy. 324 AD, Emperor Constantine moves capital of Roman Empire to Byzantium. 400 AD, St. Augustine writes his Confessions, philosophy absorbed into Christian theology. 410 AD, sack of Rome by Visigoths heralds opening of Dark Ages. 529 AD, closure of Academy in Athens by Emperor Justinian marks end of Hellenic thought. Mid-13th century, Thomas Aquinas writes his commentaries on Aristotle, era of scholasticism. 1453, fall of Byzantium to Turks, end of Byzantine Empire. 1492, Columbus reaches America, Renaissance in Florence and revival of interest in Greek learning. 1543, Copernicus publishes On the Revolution of the Celestial Orbs, proving mathematically that the earth revolves around the sun. 1633, Galileo forced by Church to recant heliocentric theory of the universe. 1641, Descartes publishes his Meditations, the start of modern philosophy. 1677, death of Spinoza allows publication of his Ethics. 1687, Newton publishes Principia, introducing concept of gravity. 1689, Locke publishes Essay Concerning Human Understanding, start of empiricism. 1710, Berkeley publishes Principles of Human Knowledge, advancing empiricism to new extremes. 1716, death of Leibniz. 1739 to 1740, Hume publishes Treatise of Human Nature, taking empiricism to its logical limits. 1781, Kant, awakened from his dogmatic slumbers by Hume, publishes Critique of Pure Reason. Great era of German metaphysics begins. 1807, Hegel publishes The Phenomenology of Mind, high point of German metaphysics. 1818, Schopenhauer publishes The World as Will and Representation, introducing Indian philosophy into German metaphysics. 1889, Nietzsche, having declared God is dead, succumbs to madness in Turin. 1921, Wittgenstein publishes Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, claiming the final solution to the problems of philosophy. 1920s, Vienna Circle propounds logical positivism. 1927, Heidegger publishes Being and Time, heralding split between analytical and continental philosophy. 1943, Sartre publishes Being and Nothingness, advancing Heidegger's thought and instigating existentialism. 1953, posthumous publication of Wittgenstein's Philosophical Investigations, high era of linguistic analysis. Chronology of Spinoza's life. 1632, Spinoza born in Amsterdam. 1646, birth of Leibniz. 1648, End of 30 Years' War, leaving large areas of Germany and Central Europe devastated. 1650. Death of Descartes. 1654. Death of Spinoza's father and ensuing lawsuit against his sister. 1655. Unsuccessful attempt to assassinate Spinoza. 1656. Excommunicated by Jewish authorities. 1660. Goes to live at village of Riensberg outside Leiden. 1663. Moves to The Hague. 1663 to 1665. Writing Ethics. 1670. Tractatus Theologico-Politicus, published anonymously. 1673. Turns down offer of chair of philosophy at University of Heidelberg. 1675. Completes Ethics. 1676. Visited by German philosopher Leibniz. 1677. Spinoza dies at The Hague. Publication of his masterwork, Ethics. This concludes the reading of Spinoza in 90 Minutes by Paul Strathern, copyright 1998 by Paul Strathern. This book was read by Richard Matthews. This unabridged recording was published by arrangement with Ivan R.D. Publisher, and was produced in 2004 by Blackstone Audio Books Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Neither this recording nor any portion of it may be reproduced or used for any purpose without prior written authorization from Blackstone Audiobooks. If you would like to obtain a complete catalogue of our titles or our monthly update telling you about new releases, and our new collection of books on CD and MP3, write to Blackstone Audiobooks, P.O. Box 969, Ashland, Oregon, zip code 97520, or call 1-800-SAY-BOOK. That's 1-800-729-2665. You may also obtain the same information from our award-winning website. Our address, all one word, is www.blackstoneaudio.com. Thank you. Of it, yet dialectical materialism remains but a lumpen shadow of Spinoza's geometric pantheism. Spinoza's influence continues. Some modern mathematicians who otherwise view philosophy with contempt retain a soft spot for him. Alas, his largely unfortunate. The clear rationalism of Spinoza's system was to inspire Hegel to an even more vast system, where steepled clarity was replaced with gargoyled German metaphysics. Spinoza equally inspired the Marxism that grew out of Hegelianism as an inversion to how most modern scientists regard the universe. The rationalism introduced by Descartes was brought to its epitome by Spinoza. Yet within a dozen years of Spinoza's death, rationalism was superseded by empiricism, as put forward by the British philosopher John Locke. Belief in a certain rational universe contains built-in self-contradictions similar to their own belief in a certain mathematical universe. The systematic explanation of the world has crumbled into a rubble of relativisms. We live in the post-war era of Humpty Dumpty, where Spinoza's the belief that ultimately the truth can be discovered by reason gave way to the belief that the only way we can know the truth is by experience. The counterwave of German metaphysics in the 19th century saw a revival of Spinoza's stock on the philosophical exchange. This was